We're back. The two ladies in the hot seat are Mandy and Kate from Love Sober. And thank you both so much for coming in and joining us in the Trauma Thrivers group. And for those that are watching later or listening to the podcast, we hope that you enjoy it too. So, girls, do you mind starting just a little bit by introducing who you are and what Love Sober is?
Yeah.
Go on, Mand.
Kate?
Go on, Mand.
Okay, so I'm Mandy Manners. So we co-created Love Sober about 3 years ago. Started as a blog of Kate's, and then I introduced the idea of doing a podcast around being mums and being sober, really, and talking about mummy wine culture, talking about what had happened to us. We were both training as coaches, and so it started to become a weekly thing. It's now 170 episodes.
Is it?
Is it
that
still
many?
going on? Still bloody going on.
Yeah, still
talking.
My
God.
So we've done a lot of interviews with different specialists and novelists and people within the community, and also just a lot of us chatting and moaning about how difficult it is being mums and trying to manage all the things. And I have my own kind of sober journey, my own trauma story. We now work as coaches as well, and we have a community called Love Sober as well, and we wrote a book called Love Yourself Sober, which is a self-care guide to alcohol-free living busy mums. We are writing another book. We're not allowed to talk about it yet.
Aren't you?
And
you're allowed to tell us a little bit about what it's about.
Yeah. Go on, Kate, tell them a little bit about what it's about.
Well, it's a bit like how to long-term sustainable, hopefully, well-being and sobriety for modern women, using the wisdom of cycles and cyclical, rather than being on this kind of ragged 24/7 high energy stressed outness. It's all very well. It's like we put down the bottle, which was that resource that we were using. Yeah. And this is all about the trying to get on board really sustainable long-term, and going a little bit deeper and a bit more woo, because our first book was about that, boundaries, practicality, socializing sober. It's some of those more, but typically people sort of go a bit sort of on an inner journey, and into the second year often this sort of stuff comes up. So that's that next layer of the onion, if you like.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And how did you both meet?
We actually met on Soberistas, which is a forum for sobriety forum, and I really liked Kate's style and thought she had nice shoes. I remember a picture and a sparkly hat she had one time, and then we started chatting.
Thanks, dude.
That's all right. And we worked out that we both lived 2 streets away from each other in Brighton, but we never actually met at the time, and we probably drank in the same pub, but we're probably too pissed to know who was around. So
true, so telling.
And so now and so it's become that, and now we train coaches too. So we developed a course in addictive behaviors, which is all around widening this conversation around the dopamine circuit, and that addiction can happen to anyone, and it's around technology, around gambling, whatever it is, it's that thing. And we live in a society now that is incredibly stressed, which is a bit what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of the nervous system, and living in this modern world. We are reaching out to cope, and so whatever it is, how can we support clients as coaches to kind of meet their goals and unlock what might be holding them back, because quite often it's a hidden thing, and if you're not informed and if you're not looking out for it, you might miss it. It's like this client's not getting where they want to be, and if you're informed, if your addictive behavior is informed, you can go, okay, well, I heard they were sitting on their sofa scrolling on social media every evening. Maybe let's explore that, and sort of helping them to really just to open that conversation and change the stigma around these things. It's especially for young people, it's so prevalent now with gaming, with you know, perfectionism with success, that we need to start creating a culture that is, you know, addictive behaviors informed. That's the mission, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the mission probably as well is to see that addictive behaviors are really just an attempt at self-soothing a nervous system that's dysregulated.
100%. Yeah.
You know, and that's the conversation, isn't it, tonight, that we want to have a little bit around how do we, without all those things, or without the alcohol, or without the gaming, or without how do we start to learn to self-regulate, or even what is self-regulation in the first place? What does it mean?
Yeah,
because there might be people listening to this that don't know what self-regulation means, or don't even realize maybe that they're self-soothing through addictive behaviors yet.
Yeah.
Who
Kate,
wants to start with that one? Kate?
Introduce yourself and then take that one.
Introduce myself. Hello, I'm Kate. I'm the other half. I'm like Morecambe and Wise.
I'm the other half.
And so who's the so I'm her other half. So Mandy said, we work together on Love Sober, and we my journey also, I have addictive story, and I have a trauma story which I didn't know was there because I didn't see it as one of those really obvious things. And that's one thing that really, once alcohol wasn't working in this way that we're talking about, I definitely was using it to try and self-soothe and self-regulate at the end of a busy day and cope, you know, and as it does, it can dance center stage without us knowing about it. So that was me. But once I'd got rid of that, I was left with this piece of what do I do now? My resource had gone. What do I do now? And I think that's where what Mandy and I's work has very much been about this last few years, is piecing together what you said, Lou. It's about how do we resource ourselves? How do we soothe ourselves? How do we feel comfortable in our own skin to be present enough in our own lives to enjoy our lives, to connect with other people, to connect with ourselves? You know, it's all the stuff, you know, all full stop, the full stop stuff, full stop. And so that led us on to this kind of idea of exploring the more holistic kind of elements. Okay, what are the tools? So this, very briefly, before we get into, as we'll go out a bit before we go in a bit again. So that led me on to kind of basically going, I want as much knowledge, because I'm a heady person. I wanted as much knowledge as possible. So I studied the science of happiness. I went, I don't want to look at what's wrong with me. I want to look at what's right with me. Done the therapy, that just feels crap for me now. So it was about, okay, that doesn't work. So isn't this often the way? So I'm going to try that. And I realized that people, when I was studying the science of happiness a few years ago, what people were talking about on sober forums was very much the same. People were starting to get into gratitude practice. People were trying to get into mindfulness. People were talking about self-compassion. People were talking about connection. So this picture started to emerge. And then during this time, Mandy and I started working together, and she made me very aware of the kind of trauma element, the mental health element. I brought in the science of happiness, and then I had a yoga practice for quite a few years. So I was involved in this polyvagal, okay, there's something in the body question about it as well. So it all sort of collided and led us to this point where we've done this course. So that's the blowing it out. So bringing it back, what are the tools, and how do we self-resource and self-regulate? And I'll just say quickly, because I'm sure we will go round, won't we? We'll go around the circle. But for me, it was very much about exploration, and dropping into where I'm at now, to then try things out to see if they make me feel better. It's almost as simple as that. It's like, and that was almost even to know that does feel better. So that was my sort of start with it. I don't know if I can I feel like I've blown it out, and maybe I need to be reminded what the question is.
Self-regulation, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Where do we want to go? Do we want to go dive into the sort of the nervous system, or do we want to talk more generally?
Well, I'm wondering if we just talk about generally a little bit more about what self-regulation means to each of us individually, and how we all made that journey from putting down our addictive processes to being able to be and stay in the body, because that essentially to me is the journey that we all have to take at some point. So maybe I'm interested in what was it like those early days of after we put it down, how do we start to even learn to be in it, or start to work with emotions or feelings or sensations, or what was there, you know, like anybody listening to this who hasn't put down their addictive processes yet, or are on the journey of being in those. I mean, for me, I just remember it. I mean, I don't know whether I should say this, but the first year or two, I was a therapist when I put down my alcohol. I didn't think a bottle of wine a day, being ex-media and radio, was an issue until I found out that it was. You know, and I think I probably cried every day for the first year of my life after I put down alcohol. And certainly for the first 2 or 3 years, I couldn't bear people behind me. I couldn't bear people near me when I was walking. I was at times really dysregulated and really triggered.
How did you come through that, Lou?
Which one of the 30 methods or models do you want, Mel?
Well, that's it, isn't it?
The toolkit,
yeah. I think essentially, in a nutshell, I think it's about learning that piece of very, very slowly being able to let emotions up, to be okay with our feelings, to take them to people in safe places, and to start to let out some of what I call the fizz. Because there was so much fizz and dysregulation in the system and the nervous system. I needed to process some of that to be able to come back into the body and feel regulated. So that was my first bit, letting some of that out in a safe, contained, held space. And for me, it was therapy. You know, that was my journey. And I tried all the NLP and I'm not saying all NLP, I love a lot of it. I've tried the more quick fixes, but actually I needed a relational model of my child parts, felt like they were being listened and attuned to and regulated via somebody else's safe nervous system, I think.
Yeah, got you.
What about you, Mel?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking as everyone was talking, like when the shift sort of happened for me, where I felt when did I go and how did I go from feeling in constant fear, feeling, you know, distressed, feeling like I couldn't cope once I'd put the drink and the drugs down, to feeling like I might be able to kind of manage those smaller things, that I might be able to go out for a walk, see friends, do all the kind of, you know, the normal things, go into Costa and get a coffee. And for me, it was a really slow journey through, I think exactly what Lou said, a lot of co-regulation. And I think that's one of the beauties of being in a mutual support group, is that you get, and I think this is, it's amazing really, because if we think about back when, you know, mutual support groups started, and specifically for me, you know, 12-step fellowships, there wasn't this knowledge and this science around co-regulation, but actually it's genius, because what happened for me was I started to socialize with other sober people and co-regulate through them. And then they became my safe place. They became the safe people to go for a meal with, to go for a coffee with. And then I had my therapist who, like, as Lou quite rightly said, helped to take the fizz out, you know, to help with the releasing, to help with, you know, getting really helping to regulate my nervous system so that, and I think the important piece about what we're talking about this evening is so that when I wasn't around the people in my mutual support group, or I wasn't around my therapist, I could feel safe on my own.
Yeah, so that's the point, right? So self-regulation is this thing of like, how do we manage our state, essentially, isn't it? So how, when the pain comes, how do we manage it? How do we be able to, you know, bring ourselves back to homeostasis and feel okay? You know, when the joy comes, as we were talking about earlier, you know, because definitely my addictive behaviors, you know, I used it on both ends of the spectrum.
Lots of people do.
You know, I used it because when I was anxious and high and I was excited to be around people, and I used it when I was sad and I was alone and felt, you know, lonely essentially. And so on both sides of that, I had to find ways in order for me to feel okay, in order for me to feel present in my life and be able to cope, you know, so self-regulate, self-cope without using something that is going to cause me harm, you know. What's interesting, we were talking about this, you know, is that how it changes and how it grows out, you know, for people. Like, and we've talked about this before, you know, within our trauma experiences and our trauma, you know, I'd like Kate to talk about this a little bit more with the Iron Lions model. But you know that everything doesn't happen straight away, you know, and so for someone might be able to access, you know, meditation in terms of self-regulating themselves. For me, that's not possible in my trauma recovery right now.
I don't think it's
for me at the beginning,
for many,
it was,
to be fair.
You know, it was, and it still is, one of my main is going in the bath. Like the bath was my safe space, you know. And you know, when you said which thing is it, is because what you do, and Kate was saying before, is you build up lots of things and then you test, you try, you know. Sometimes we're having a conversation, it's not going to the garden centre and buying a new plant, that's not kicking in, you know. It's not the bath, it's not putting my headphones on and listening to hip hop, but it's like you have all this toolkit of things that you can use. It was the therapist, like, okay, you know, or it might have been dancing with really loud hip hop on, and you know, and just letting it out. But it's the ability to build this kind of toolkit of different things that you can use, you know. And I had a very, very stressful moment, you know, last weekend, where I just, you know, my brain, I was no longer in my body. My brain was searching for something to take pain away. You know, it's just like, I can't. So it went through all of the things, you know, but because of the training of building that toolkit, it went through all the things. And some of those things were very dark and not where I wanted to go. And it landed on, I'll get in the bath and listen to Sarah Blondin, you know, and that was enough, because that was a safe space. And that was my first point of entry, enabling me to come back to myself and go, okay, now I've got options, now I phone a friend. You know?
And I was going to say, man, just pick up on, well, just return to the co-regulation piece, because it's so important. And for me, there were a couple of bits just to answer to that question. I realized that through my yoga practice and my amazing yoga studio, the lady who runs it was a mental health practitioner and is trained in she's a trauma-informed yoga practitioner. And so she was talking, so basically for the last 7 years, 3 times a week, I've been co-regulating with people on the yoga mat. I had no idea I was doing that, but my experience of my world is entirely different. But that first year of sobriety is very much, I was so dysregulated, like you said. I had to even know when I needed to go to the toilet. Often I just wave away the red flags. So I think starting to learn about my own body impulses, built that capacity and let some of that fizz out, again, I didn't know any of that, but that's what was happening. I had to run, I had to move, I had to eat, I had to it was very reactive as a way of, I was going, I need a resource, give me a resource. And it had to be anything but the booze. So that was that first year in. Slowly, as the regulation happened, I could be a bit more proactive about it, or a little bit less. It was like there was more capacity. And for me, very recently, actually, because I got quite good at sort of I think there was a bit of functional freeze with me, where people would go, "You're so calm, Kate," and I'm like, I'm really freaking out inside, but you'd never tell, right? Well, Mandy would, because she knows me. But anyway, but very recently have I touched upon my sort of rage.
Right.
That's like, I've been now my sober streak. I've been on the sober path for 8 years, but quite
that's called
recently,
the menopause stage. Sorry.
There is. Well, that's a whole other. Excuse my French. But so I'm finding myself, and partly because the work I've done with Irene Lyon recently and around diaphragms, was that I go in the car and I let out, when I've got quiet, these awful, dreadful war cries. Blood, they're like blood. They're bloodthirsty, right? I'm like, "Brah!" And sometimes I need to do that, and it feels like I want to vomit a boulder. So that's quite recent. So, but I feel regulated enough and resourced in myself to be able to not scare me. I'm just like, oh right, I'm shifting a bit of crap. So that piece and that evolution piece, I relate to.
Okay. And is it helpful, do you think, for anybody watching? Because I know, Kate, you've got a diagram of kind of a little bit of what we're talking about that maybe you can share, because maybe we can talk people through. You've mentioned Irene Lyons a couple of times, who again, I send a lot of my clients and recommend to, who is a somatic experiencing practitioner, amongst other things, and who's got a very good YouTube channel and works with the nervous system, as does a guy called Roland Bal, B-A-L, who just does meditations for people with complex trauma or PTSD. So he's a meditation expert for those people with trauma. But I think it's quite useful to tell people that self-regulation, and just show them maybe the ladder and what's going on.
Can you see it?
No.
Oh, share screen. Share. Can you share it?
Now,
see it?
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Can see it now. So hopefully they can see it in the group. So as far as I can see on the
screen,
safe and social.
Can you make it full screen? It's not full screen. Sorry.
That's all right.
I can.
If you press play.
Pardon?
Press play.
Play on the top bar in the middle. It's kind of sat on its own. Left a bit, up a bit, down. No, that's it.
There we go.
That quiz show used to do that.
Left, up, lower.
I don't know how you guys explain this to people, but how I tend to do it is ventral, which you can see on the left, where it says safe and social. Ventral is kind of the green, and that's in our social engagement system is turned on. We feel in our adult, we're in our present moment, we can engage, we can do all of those wonderful things. And then as soon as we start to feel triggered internally, externally, or by something, we start to go into what I call our hyper arousal, or our sympathetic nervous systems up there as well, and we start to go into, I think I might have to defend or protect myself. And if that's not working, we then go into, or our nervous system then goes into, dorsal vagal shutdown, or what I call hypoarousal.
Right.
So with my clients and work in the last 20 years, I think that some people get very much stuck in either their sympathetic activation or their dorsal vagal flop collapse activation, and they find it very difficult to come back up to ventral and be an adult. So really, self-regulation, from my perspective, I'd be interested in all three of you what you think, is about helping somebody to know when they're in ventral vagal and what brings them into green, what starts to take them into amber and red. But also, if I'm really honest, for me, where most people avoid is their dorsal vagal. And when they're in dorsal vagal, for me, that's when their child stuff and their historical stuff is activated. And that's what we need to release to come back up the ladder.
This was a really, really important thing for me to be able to identify that was going on within myself. And now, you know, I know that there are different resources that I have for if I'm in my dorsal, if I'm in my sympathetic. And, you know, generally what I do, and this isn't what works for everybody, but, you know, if I'm feeling in, you know, a state of anxiety, if I'm feeling in a state of fear, if I'm feeling in a state of slight kind of manicness,
sympathetic then, yeah,
it's always very interesting. You know, I know at that point I need to do, for me, the meditation or have a bath or do something that's very grounding and very calming. Whereas if I feel like I'm in dorsal, if I feel like I'm in shutdown, for me it's a freeze, and that is actually much more common for me than being in my sympathetic. That is when I need to move. And like Lou said, it, you know, to not just to release, but to start to shift the energy, to start to awaken, to start to move back up into my window of tolerance. And I think there's this real there's a bit of kind of zeitgeisty stuff that goes on around, you know, listen to your body. If you feel like you need to rest, then rest. And for me, I needed to identify the difference between when I'm tired and I need to rest and sleep, and when I'm in shutdown and I need to bring myself up and release. And that was probably one of the trickiest things for me. And even now, I don't think I get it right all the time.
Yeah, and
Nobody gets it right all the time.
That open curiosity that Kate was saying before, isn't it? It's just like, you know, you just test it out, because sometimes you don't know, and then by sort of, you know, test, it's like, oh, actually I'm just really tired, I'm just going to go to bed. You know, you're trying to fix. Sometimes it's about the fix, and sometimes it's about actually, you know, accepting what it is. But you don't know that until you get that kind of, you have enough tools to sort of play around with it.
And
I'm
also,
really sorry. I'm trying to stop sharing.
No, that's brilliant. And you know, sometimes I think it's about when we are down there or feeling it and really in it, not moving out of it too quickly, because sometimes we need to be able to process what's there without taking it away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes you're not up for doing that either.
And you know, for the other bit about that sort of being in the sympathetic, the fight flight thing, you know, that I've had clients before sort of saying, but that's good, isn't it, that, you know, that I've got this, it's better than me feeling bad or, you know, or disempowered. And I was like, in that particular conversation, it's to remember that it's an important survival response, right? That's supposed to be activated for short periods of time to adapt to an external threat.
Yeah.
And so if we're stuck in that, which a lot of us are, aren't we? We're with the chronic stress, with the busyness, it's going to wreak havoc on we can't digest our food properly, we get chronic health problems, we get, you know, we start resourcing ourselves with unhelpful habits because we're trying to kind of bring ourselves down. So all of those are really important, but they're supposed to be activated at the correct time according to our circumstances. And so what's the first step, do you think, Lou, in starting to become skillful with our nervous systems?
I think it's about trying to become unstuck in any of them and starting to, I think the first skill for me is in the noticing.
It's like Mel said, isn't it?
Yeah, rather than the judging, because I think so many of us get stuck in that judgment and that what I call critical parent. You know, I should be an adult, I should be feeling this, and yet we're either anxious or fearful or going into some sort of response about something, and then it's all the shoulds and the musts and the ought tos and that kind of internal dialogue of not just starting to recognize, I think, that our nervous system is doing all of the things that it's doing to protect us. You know, and so it's, I think the first step is about tracking and knowing. That's what the polyvagal theory's done for me. You know, it's allowed me to tell clients exactly what's happening from a not a mental health perspective, not even an addiction or a trauma perspective per se, because those are all words, but what is happening within your own system, and how can you track it, and how can you start to shift it yourself? So it's kind of giving some power and some autonomy back to that person, so that they're in charge really of their own body and their own system, and able to see that they don't have to fight themselves, that actually their system is trying to support them.
And I always say it's about moving from judgment to curiosity. You know, moving from that space of, oh, there's something going on with me, there's something wrong with me, what's happening, I need to change it, I need to do something about it, to going, oh, what's this telling me?
Yeah. And there's a brain reason for that too, because judgment comes from the prefrontal cortex, as we know, and noticing or observation or curiosity come from the medial prefrontal cortex, which is hooked up to the amygdala. So if we're coming from that part, it can actually affect the amygdala and calm it down, whereas judgment from here, it doesn't.
Sorry, go on, Mandy.
No, I was just going to say, I think again, these kind of processing of discovery, you know, and accessing where you're at right now, you know, a lot for some people are like, oh my God, that's just impossible, you know, to release that if I'm in a triggered state around, you know, a family member or around a situation. So you kind of have these emergency kind of tools which you can just access in that moment of just of maintaining, essentially, you know. But again, after that, it's the release.
Yes.
You know, so it's this two-part process. You know, you've got the stresses in your life, so we work on boundaries, we work on, you know, that toxic relationship or changing your job, but then you've got to release the stress that's been building up in all, you know, for the years. And the same in the free sense, it's like, okay, we can work on, you know, cuddling ourselves and the environment and making things secure for us, but we still need to be able to get those, you know, bring it back up or get it out.
Also, self-resourcing, is that about not about having things that we can do to stop the stresses building up in the first place? You know, once we get to the point where we've gone through that first part, you know, because I'm obviously aware, you know, we are trauma thrivers, and a lot of our audience have gone through that first part. So once we've been through that first part, is the self-resourcing then about having things in our lives that enable us to kind of release and discharge almost on a daily basis, to stop building up and needing that big release and needing that big awareness.
I mean, I always say now that I used to laugh about it before I had an intellectual framework for this. A couple of years ago, I'd be like, I've actually got a really elaborate self-care practice, like, and I have to, you know, include, which is the yoga, which is a morning routine. I have quite a stressful time at home within the family. I've got extra needs within the family, so I had to adapt again and put in extra stuff, like definitely walk in the woods, but I have to be very conscious of my well-being and my routines, and that is all about that. Then I discovered if I lay down on the floor 5 times a day and wave my arms and legs like seaweed, that would help me to come out of my head and go all fizzy. So it's literally like finding a little ways, a grounding practice. If you sense that you're starting to go, how are you going to actually, what and so whether that's proactive, like I know I've planned it in the diary, or whether it's like, oh, okay, I need it now, I can pull it out the bag. It's about assembling that, isn't it? Sort of reactive and proactive tools. I've just got one more thing I'd say about that. Mandy told me this recently. This was just, I've been experimenting with sensory stacking. So my walk in the woods wasn't managing to release what I need to release at the moment. And Mandy introduced me to these noise cancelling headphones, which make everything go quiet. And I know I've got auditory sensitivity processing issues, but I hadn't really consciously paid attention there. And now I went into the woods the other day with these headphones on and listened to this classical music, saw the sunlight streaming through the trees, and I just went, wow, bang. I just cried, went up, went down. It all just flooded, but in a completely fine and good, safe way for me. And so I think another part of this is looking at our senses. And how do we look after our sensory needs, because they are like really big tools for us, aren't they?
Yeah, because they're the triggers and the tools, right?
That's a beautiful way of putting it. They're the triggers and the tools. Yeah.
I think everything.
Okay, bye. That's it.
Yeah. That's it. That's us done. Yeah. I think it's about current, isn't it? It's about currently in this moment, in the here and now, managing differently and, doing things to help ourselves in this moment. And then there's the old stuff. There's what comes up and kind of knocks us out, and we don't know that it's coming. So I think we can definitely start to employ loads and loads of tactics in the present moment that are going to help manage us as soon as we start to go from green up to yellow or orange, that usually is, and go, okay, I want to bring myself back down to green. Because the ideal of self-regulation and self-resourcing is to expand the green, isn't it? Is to expand the window, or to make our adult present moment self feel okay, whatever we're feeling.
Yeah.
So what have you used to expand your green and expand your adult in the present moment into green? All of you. What kind of, you've got your self-care, obviously, routine, Kate.
I've got a mixture of high quality information, contact with, so I need the head knowledge, I need all the chats with Mand a lot. We chat every week on the podcast, and then with other people, sober community, my yoga community. Okay, so that keeps you in ventral anyway, because your social engagement. Those would be my big ones, and then those self-care, soothing, the downshift ones that I do. I'd say those are my big ones. And musical theatre. Like, whoosh, hello, here I am. Lovely. So that would be the joy spot and the glimmer of when I can just go for it. What about singing? You? Singing all the time. What's your favorite song? I got so many. I used to be a musician, so I have many. But I used to be all rock. I'm rock and rolly, trip hoppy kind of 90s girl. Okay. But get me on the stage and I'll sing anything. Like literally, you'd have to drag me off.
You were one of the divas, weren't you? In
Priscilla.
In Priscilla.
I did. That's my last role, was in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and
Oh my God, that's amazing.
I was singing on a shoe.
Yeah, and just to, you know, to contextualize that, you know, I'm sure you don't mind me saying, but at that moment, you know, Kate's sister-in-law had just really tragically died of cancer.
Oh God.
So this is you know, a very extreme case of how something that is your passion and is, you know, a love and that
helped me cope.
Could help you cope through something that's in, you know, a massive trigger and a massively difficult time. It just held the space for that other part of you.
I call it the sacred church of drag. It really held me.
So it's in, you know, because this is what this is about, right? It's like, as you said before, no matter what happens, we can hold ourselves in our adult self and not return to those, you know, unhealthy behaviors.
I think that's why it's so important with our clients, or particularly, you know, some of my clients, they don't have an experience of adult or green, and they don't have the hobbies or the self-care behaviors or any of that to kind of fall back on when they're dysregulated. So it's about us trying to get them to have some of those joys in their life, you know, or even relationships like we've all got, where, you know, you've both got each other. I can phone Mel, thankfully now, and, you know, whinge to her, and hopefully vice versa. It's so important that we've got people like that we can do that with.
And I always look at it very much for myself and for my clients from a mind, body, soul aspect. And I try my best to do something each day to nourish each part, each of those parts of me. And, you know, that might look different on different days, but, you know, I have regular things I do. So for the mind, I do meditation, you know, for the body, I've got my running, and I do a bit of yoga as well. And for my soul, I have, again, you know, meditation practices. I have other spiritual practices that I'm involved with. I try and, you know, be of use, be of service to people. So I have, you know, I have these things in place so that I know on a daily basis, without having to think about it too much, I'm feeding each part of those parts of me. And then I have the, like you quite rightly said, Kate, then I have the kind of emergency ones as well. So it's like, if I'm, you know, suddenly triggered or activated, or, you know, something has happened, right, what do I need to do? And usually for me, the first thing I need to remind myself to do is to bloody breathe.
It's to breathe.
You know, that is the first thing. You know, my clients say to me, what is the first thing when I'm feeling triggered? What is the first thing I do? Breathe. You know, because that is just, and then most of the time for me, it is picking up the phone to somebody, getting that connection. You know, that is absolutely vital for me in terms of, you know, how I regulate and resource.
Mandy, what about you?
Yeah, so going on that kind of mind, body, soul, I guess. For me, mind wise, it's, you know, I do a lot of values practice. So I always check in with, like, you know, if I'm feeling triggered or if I'm feeling activated, it's like, what's checking in with my values, like, are these the right people? Am I in the right space? You know, if my core value is being authentic, or, you know, having integrity, have I stepped out of that? You know, so that's the kind of, you know, and I'm constantly checking in with that, and just having a conversation with all, as our friend Rose says, the committee that lives in our head, you know, the sacrificer, the busy one, you know, the one, all those people that chat, you know, and remind myself that, oh, I'm in control and I'm the adult here. Body, unfortunately, I used to run, but I had an injury. So that's been quite interesting when you lose something that was a precious resource. For me, it's around, you know, swimming or water. It's, I think, because of my trauma process and being quite hypervigilant for so long, I still struggle with open space. So there's something very protective and very calming for me, or getting under a, you know, a weighted blanket, for example, those things can be really good for me. Or, you know, putting on a woolly jumper, just those things that really, you know, cosset me and hold me. And in terms of spiritual practice, I think for me, I mean, I don't have a spiritual practice. That's something that is a big question in my life. It's not something, you know, I've ever had really, but I have had music. Music has been my, you know, thing. And so I can lose myself, I can change my mood, I can enter into a different space listening to different music. So that's hugely kind of important. And I will, like, every day I'll just put my headphones on and I'll have a moment, you know, to myself, and hold whatever emotion it is, you know, and hold that sadness if that's what's there. But like, listen to Portishead, you know, or hold that, or push my joy and listen to some disco, you know, so I can really use that to help me to regulate and bring up what I want or shift, which is really helpful, because I thought that was the thing that I had to let go when I stopped drinking, you know, because I was that party girl and the festival girl and all about rave music and all that. And to be able to bring that back actually into my adult has been, you know, brilliant.
Lovely. And how important do we think nutrition is on this journey? We've talked a bit about exercise.
I mean, gut health and brain health is connected, right? And as Kate said, you know, you're going to have problems with your digestion if you're dysregulated. You're not going to be getting nutrients in the way that you should, or you know. So I think working with, I mean, I worked with a nutritionist, and it was hugely important, you know, having almonds, having walnuts, you know, things that sort of boost your dopamine levels, or, you know, can increase your GABA levels and really help sort of support lots of protein, you know, protein in the morning, you know, helps you build serotonin levels and helps you kind of start the day well. So and eating, you know, because I certainly lived on red wine and coffee and was a burnt out, you know, lecturer at a university, and that was my life. And so just eating regular meals and healthy food, you know, green, you know, good greens, and eating the rainbow, it's all
sometimes a bit of cake.
Sometimes a bit of cake.
Always.
Can't be too perfect all the time. Otherwise,
especially if you sense a state. Like for me, like if I create a picture, so I'll go for a lovely autumn walk and pick up some lovely leaves with the kids, and then go and have a spiced apple cake. Like it's almost bringing in all of the senses, and that sort of doesn't feel like I'm doing just a knee-jerk reaction sugar hit. It's like it's really nourishing.
And whilst you're talking of senses, I know that you both wanted to say a bit about sensory processing and neurodiversity. Could you divulge a little bit more on that score for us?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? What we're doing is we've been noticing, but I think very much Mandy and my work over the last few years, I'll speak for us both and just challenge me if I'm talking out of turn, and has been almost to join the dots between many conversations for ourselves and sort of in the ways we wanted to work. So with the alcohol, with addictive behaviours, with trauma, with mental health, with then the dive, you know, intersection and you know, a wider social level. And then part of this that sort of came into the picture was how many of our community were identifying as neurodiverse.
Could we explain what neurodiverse is for people that are listening that don't understand that term?
So things like ADHD, being on the autistic spectrum, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's. There's almost, and again there's this very sort of spectrum of all of these in terms of how they're showing up for people. So there's been a big thing lately about being a highly sensitive person, HSP, which is not, you know, hasn't reached any diagnostic thresholds there, but is sort of seems to be glimmering on this in this topic. So we are asking the questions again, like, so you can look at these things through the nervous system lens, right? You can say, well, is ADHD part, you know, some in utero trauma, dysregulation? Is it
what was their attachment like?
Was there an attachment thing, or is it the fact that we've all sped up and we're on our smartphones and this is dysregulating? So I think, but for us, I mean, this has also gone as a personal process. As a member of my family is diagnosed with ADHD, and autism, and then piecing it back through our family of going, oh, right, okay, there's a generational piece there. So what I guess we're trying to say is that some people may have had diagnoses, they may have people in the family. What we do know is that there's a struggle, there are some diagnostic criteria there, but that can show up and that can be impacted by trauma, be traumatic, and also lead us to be resourcing ourselves with addictive behaviours. Mads, have you got anything to add?
I think, well, there's the two elements, isn't it? It's that ostracization, you know, that feeling of being alone and being othered, you know, which we're seeing in terms of, you know, the race question, or, you know, your sexuality. This is another part of that, in terms of you're in a school and you're neurodiverse in a neurotypical school system, you're going to be, you know, the naughty child, or you're going to be you know, not given things that work for you. You know, saying my son has dyspraxia, you know, it's like he's been told ever since he was very young that he's terrible at writing, he's messy, he's, you know, to quite a degree that's hurt him and, you know, impacted on his self-esteem. And so now we understand it's like, it's just, he just needs to type on a keyboard, it's just not his thing, right? But so much of that has sort of goes unnoticed, you know. And so what do you do when you feel othered and you don't feel like you belong? Then you outsource, or you resource with, you know, an addictive behavior. But on the other side, when you look at, you know, the trauma side of things and how the brain works, you know, if your executive function isn't working well, if you've got impulse control issues, if you find it very difficult to calm down, you know, which are all sort of parts of ADHD and autism and things like that, you know, if you find it very hard to organize yourself, you know, all those things,
you go into fight flight, right?
You're going to be in that activated, you know, part of your nervous system, and it's going to be harder for you to kind of to manage things. So it's that the care of people, you know, turning up to us as coaches, is understanding their sensory needs, understanding their needs in terms of how they work, how they understand things, you know,
how they process things.
It's really important, you know, it's really important that we add that to this part of the conversation around.
There's a lot of the work that I do actually with my clients is about the sensory stuff. And most of my clients identify as having been neurodiverse or having members of the family as well, and or those addictive behaviours. It seems to be such a big thing. Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, because it was something that Mandy said and talked about the othering, and I know that piece about shame is such a big piece, and I was going to talk about a little bit, but I'm happy to go elsewhere and come back if we got time, in terms of so we've talked about how do we connect with other people, but how are we connecting with it ourselves? And I know for me, the piece about self-compassion, learning a self-compassion practice to be able was a fundamental key thing. And that seems to segue into what Mandy was talking about the shame, about the othering, and about that piece. And I don't know whether that is a good thing to talk about now, or
to talk about the shame and the othering. Well, I don't know. I suppose I understand everything in terms of, you know, for me, I work it back into, if green is adult and yellow or orange in some cases is what I call critical parent, and the child is the dorsal vagal shutdown, then I think a lot of people who are severely traumatized don't want to access their child. They're completely embarrassed or shamed about the child and the beliefs about self that come about not only because of the initial trauma, but all the secondary stuff that we're talking about. I've got a label, oh, I'm an addict, oh, I've been told I've got borderline personality disorder, or my addiction has created that. So that shame about core self completely is part of the healing journey, and we have to work with those child parts, and we have to make people conscious of the beliefs that those child parts have about themselves, so that they know that they're not their adult per se, and that their critical parent, or you were talking about, you know, committees, or you know, that all the people in our heads that tell us, they just compound, don't they, what's in the not okay child. They just completely confirm it. So for me, that self-compassion piece with a lot of people doesn't come until they realize that they need to bring in a nurturing parent rather than a critical parent. And I think on the trauma journey, it's quite hard sometimes for people, often for a while, to give themselves any sort of self-care or self-nurture, let alone let themselves off the hook for their trauma or their diagnoses.
So to that, I would signpost, I hope it's all right to signpost, what helped me was Tara Brach. I don't know if she's a Buddhist psychologist.
Listen,
and she goes,
I think it's great to signpost to everybody, because not one method or model or person or group can teach everybody everything. We pick up on our journey. You know, I've been on mine for 25 years. We pick up different things.
Bits,
yeah.
So she goes through the process, and she works a lot with this trauma and shame and addictive behaviors, but through a sort of Buddhist and psychology background. But she takes you through a process of RAIN, which was recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. And it was that nurture bit. There's a brilliant YouTube video on that if people are interested in that. But that what you said really spoke to me in terms of, but breaking it down and saying these are some steps you can do, really worked for me. And it was that when I'm feeling shit, to be able to say it's okay, sweetheart, like literally be
recognizing
able to
it,
and allowing it. Where's it showing
not
up?
Tolerating
being
it,
curious, investigating it, and then a big old dose of love. It's okay, sweetheart. And
well, it's the same as every therapist in the book would say: recognize, tolerate, validate.
Okay.
It's part of the self-soothing, self-efficacy that you don't, well, that I certainly didn't learn as a traumatized child.
No,
that is not taught necessarily. I'm hoping with all the education that we have now, it's being taught more to children, you know, by parents, and please God one day, you know, in schools as part of the curriculum. But you know, it is that getting to that point of being able to self-soothe and self-effacate. And that was huge for me. And like you say, Kate, you know, sometimes I remember the first time I gave myself a hug, you know, and I was lying in bed and I was weeping and I was sobbing, and it was not long after I got clean and sober. And I just kept saying, I just need a hug. And then this thought came to me, well, you can hug yourself. And I remember I just put my arms around myself and hugged myself. And the feeling that I got from that was just incredible. But, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy to get to that and to believe it as well.
But I think you're right, Mel, and I think Kate too, it's the turning point. Because, oh my God, once we can start to be our own nurturing parent, that, you know, a lot of the work is done when we can get to that.
That was my last day one. That happened. I did that. It was so profound. I talked about it. It was, and like when you said it's the turning point, Lou, makes me feel really emotional, because I'm like, what you said about the parent thing.
I'm really aware that we're coming up to the hour, and one
Yeah.
thing that we haven't talked about that I was really excited to talk about, so I wonder if we can just touch on it briefly, is the finding joy. Because I think, you know, for so many of us, you know, that have lived through trauma, that have lived through addiction, that, you know, maybe with trauma I mean, to some degree, for me, the only way that I ever found joy was going out and getting wasted. And the idea, you know, of being left with all this trauma and finding something joyful, first of all, scared the bejesus out of me, because I was like, well, if I get there, then I'm going to want to use drugs, because I'm going to want to heighten that feeling. And also, I just didn't know how to start. I didn't know where to look for it.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of the ultimate myth about, you know, drugs and alcohol or anything, right? It's like, that's where you access joy, and actually it's the thing that rids you of it, you know. And I was so low and so depressed, and I didn't enjoy anything. I didn't enjoy my family. I didn't enjoy anything about my existence. I was dead, you know. I was dead. And you're right, like when you come into sobriety, it's just like terribly scary. Like, how am I ever gonna act? I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to have fun or be or access joy other than outsourcing it to something, because that's what I've done ever since, you know, I could. So I guess for me, it's that the two-pronged thing, because it's not easy with trauma, right, to just be like, what did you do as a kid, you know, do that, because that's not necessarily a safe space.
Yeah.
So partly it was it was finding little moments, like you know, little glimmers, as it were, of like hologram stickers, you know, pop into my head. Okay, like, fine, there's something around color, or, you know, or just taking those little morsels of things that brought you joy, and building on those, but also just getting curious, super curious about the future, you know, because I was so stuck in, for me, my teenage self, you know, because that's when my trauma was. So I was so stuck in just repeating the same things I've been doing since I was 18. You know, it was like, what do adults do? That's, you know, what do I want to be doing when I'm, you know, an older lady, and creating this real image of this, you know, older lady with tattoos and, you know, paddle boarding and going hiking and traveling, and knowing I didn't have to do any of that stuff now, but God, wasn't it exciting that person might exist one day, that kind of possibility, you know. And so that was my joy spot of possibility, that little moment of possibility that things can progress and change, and I don't have to just stay where I am. You know, Kate, I'll carry on. I've got a dog whimpering at me.
Well, I was going to say, like Mandy said, it just reminded me of a blog I wrote last month, actually, and it was called Tiny Joy. And it was like, maybe joy is those tiny, like we think of joy as like, whoa!
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, those micro moments, those tiny glimmers, those spider threads, those early morning deep breath, the first thing early morning, maybe, you know, just start so tiny and see if you get a tingle, see if you get that. I call them signs of life, like looking for signs of life, literally. That's where joy begins for me, is those tiny signs of life.
The thing what you said earlier, Mel, in terms of you know, community and service, right? It's like when you start to interact and have a purpose or some connection with the world and have a meaning in that, you know, that builds those joy spots in your brain, that builds that kind of like, I mean something.
And I'm going to be a real doom merchant and say, if you expect joy in early recovery,
no, it's important though. You can't access it, can you?
But you can't say to somebody to feel joy, because joy, as you're all saying, is a big emotion. Joy is a big emotion, and how we get to joy are those little moments of, like Mandy was saying, hope, or those little moments of self-acceptance, or those little moments of pride, or those little moments of all the small steps. Because if we've been in addiction or trauma and we've been dissociated and disconnected, we've cut off all of our feelings. And we can't just suddenly go, oh, let's turn the joy on now then. It's going to take time for all of those feelings to come back into our body. And joy feels like it's the end event after we've got the moments of contentment, or the moments of peace, or the moments of tranquility. And then maybe we get to the joy. But I would say start with contentment, and just little pockets of hope and contentment and pride and feeling okay. The joy will come.
Big part of, for me, a big part of the journey to finding joy for me was a gratitude practice. And, you know, I've heard this saying, and it just resonated with me, which is that, you know, you don't become grateful through being happy, you become happy through being grateful. And that was my experience around finding joy. You know, it was like when I started to find the things that I was grateful for, it was like, oh, those things are making me smile, or they're making my heart feel bigger, or they're, you know, and then it could grow from there.
And I think it's important to say that, like, people often, like, gratitude can feel quite weighty, right? And people can often feel like they're not doing gratitude right. It's like, oh, I should be really grateful. Because it gets, certainly for me in my, you know, my family story, it's like, you should be grateful, you should be happy, you should be, you know, we get a lot of that messaging from society. You should love being a mother, you should enjoy this, you know.
Sorry.
You know, and so you're like, oh, all of a sudden, like, I should be really grateful every day. But what you said, you know, is like, oh, that made me happy. That's what it's about.
I noticed.
Like, oh, I noticed something that made me happy. You know, I call them happy hits. It's like, I really like that old man's stripy socks.
And I'm sorry if somebody had said to me about gratitude early on in my journey, I'd have told them to foxtrot Oscar.
It's like Kate with mindfulness. It's like, really?
Oh yeah, no, and the metta bhavana used to make me angry. Don't make me do a loving kindness meditation, because I will literally get nasty.
Again, it's that kind of.
But I can do it now, but I can't get to Donald Trump. I can't.
So ladies, I'm aware that we're really out of time, but where next for you now, and where what are you up to? If we want to hear more, how do we get more grateful for Kate and Mandy?
We do actually do a group program, a group coaching program called the Love Sober Life School, which is all the stuff that we talk about, the happy hits, the toolkit basically. And it's a 3-month group program which starts at the end of, when does it start?
Mid-November.
November the 6th, I believe. But you can find us at lovesober.com and find out about that.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. And I believe that we've also doing something together in January. January the 2nd, which is the Be Sober Live conference in
Sobriety Breakthrough, it's called.
Sobriety Breakthrough Live. So if anybody would like to come and see some of us there on stage talking about addiction and trauma and recovery, it's Simon Chappell's event, so it's at his besoberlive.co.uk, and there's loads of other speakers as well, aren't there?
Annie Grace,
Emily,
Cyprus,
and also, Lou, you're going to be on our podcast soon as well.
I am.
And Mel, we're going to invite Mel on as well.
Brilliant.
So we do the podcast every week if we can. So that's, you know, and there's a back catalogue of many, you know, from the early days of all through all the things of sobriety. So, you know, it's a free resource. So definitely check it out.
And it's called Love Sober Podcast. It's on iTunes, Spotify.
Brilliant.
All the places.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies. It's been a pleasure, and really look forward to catching up soon. And I hope for those of you that have been listening or watching, or watch it later or listen later on either Facebook or YouTube or the podcast, I hope you enjoyed it and you got something from it. And please keep in touch. Let us know any questions, particularly in the Trauma Thrivers Facebook group. Please put them underneath and we'll come back in and answer them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the meantime, have a lovely rest of the day. Take care and lots of love to everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.